There's already been a ton of great campaigns this year, and I'm not someone who backs too many campaigns. I do try to keep my collection light, and I try not to back campaigns that I'm not absolutely sure about, because although a lot of these do turn out to be really great games, they're just not always games that I necessarily want to keep in my collection. And if they're not games I'm going to be keeping for the long term, they're probably games that I'd rather just buy in retail or not at all. This video is going to be focused on the campaigns that I backed on Gamefound, but if you want to see the ones that I backed on Kickstarter, I made a whole separate video for that one and I posted up last week, but I'll have a link to that in the description down below. I didn't back quite as many on Gamefound that I did on Kickstarter, so I'm going to go through a few special mentions, as well as a few campaigns that I didn't back that happened to do quite well even without me. On last week's video, I did have the suggestion to go through the games in the order of the ones that most interest me, so I didn't do it in that video, but I will do it in this one. So the first game that I'm talking about is going to be the one that I'm least interested in, and then the last one is going to be the one that I'm most excited about. That being said, I did back these, so I'm still very interested in all of them, but I'll try to give some context as to why I'm ranking them where I do. If there's any games that you're super excited about, or if you want to know why I didn't back a particular campaign, feel free to leave a comment on this video or my other video. I'm happy to answer any of those questions, and I'm also really interested to hear about the campaigns that you're most excited about. But without further ado, let's jump into it. And the first campaign that I have on this list is going to be for Food Chain Magnate. And this was initially a campaign that I was very not interested in for a variety of reasons, mostly the way that the campaign was run, and I do have a whole separate video for that. If you want to know what all that's about, you can go ahead and check out my When Are Board Games Too Expensive? A definitive guide video, which I do have posted under my Board Game Chats playlist, but you can also go ahead and search that with shelf clutter, and I'm sure it'll show up on the YouTube search. But luckily for me and a lot of you out there as well, they did end up making some changes to the way that they're running this campaign to offer something a little bit more reasonable, and I do go into that in that video as well. But none of that is the reason why this one is the lowest on my list. The main reason is that I haven't actually played this game. I did read the rules and I covered it, and it looks like a game that I would absolutely love. But I also heard a lot of criticisms that the game can be very imbalanced, and there are some points early in the game that can pretty much set you on a trajectory for the rest of the game. And apparently you can play a lot of the game just knowing that you have no chance to win, and there's still being like an hour left to play. I tried to play this anytime that I could at conventions and things like that, but for whatever reason, it just never made its way to the table. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to try this one before I backed it, but I also know that I could probably sell this for at least what I paid for if it's a game that I end up not liking. I did back the deluxe edition pledge because I'm not too interested in a lot of the upgrades that were offered here. I think they mostly detract from the game, add a lot of cost, and also just make a lot more for me to store. And it's nice that this edition has both the core game and the expansion in a single box, which is something that I always try to do anyway. And the next campaign is Ice Unlimited, and this one is a fantastic game, and this is the second edition of that game. And the original one was a lot of fun to play, but I actually ended up giving it to my brother because he happened to like it more than I did. I liked it quite a lot. I just thought that the rules were pretty cumbersome, and it was difficult to find the answers that we were looking for anytime that a question came up as we were playing the game. And I just didn't want to be digging through a rule book most of the time when I'm just trying to have a good time playing a board game. That being said, this new edition fixes pretty much every issue that I had with that game. They've listened to their backers, rewritten the rulebook, and streamlined almost every aspect of this game. You're almost getting a completely different game here, except the core mechanisms are still in play. We're going to be putting out your workers, gathering up different tiles, and then using those tiles either for abilities or set collection to score you points throughout the game. For this one, I did just end up backing the conversion kit because, like I said, my brother still has my copy of the game, and I'm not going to ask for it back or anything like that. I did give it to him. It's his now, but I do still want to play it, so I'm going to be getting this conversion kit, giving it to him, and then what's up? I'm going to go. Okay, cool. And then I'll just have to visit him anytime that I want to play it. And the next one is the Baseball Highlights 2045 Bases Loaded Edition, which is pretty much everything previously offered in this game, as well as some new content. And this one's a competitive deck-building baseball game where players are going to be playing their cards in order to get different players up to bat, with each of those players having different special abilities or different speeds that they can run around the bases. There's a few factors at play here with the way that the batters bump each other around on the board that you can use to your advantage. But the reason I'm so excited about this one is because this is a bit of a cult classic. If you watch any reviews on this, they're all very, very positive, but the actual game is actually pretty difficult to find. This does play up to 4 players, but I bought it intending it to play as a 2-player game because it looks like it plays quite well at that player count. And it's the 2-player games that get the most play in my collection, and I'm always excited to add something new into the mix to add a little bit of variety. And I think this one will do that because this plays like nothing else that I currently own. And also my girlfriend likes baseball and she told me to buy this one. But the game that I'm most excited about out of anything that I've backed so far this year is, of course, Ironwood by Mindclash Games. This is a game that's getting very positive reviews from anyone that's played it, but also I have read the rules on this one, and I personally think it looks like a ton of fun, and I really like some of the design choices here. You're going to be using action cards in order to take your actions, but what's interesting about the area control in this game is that you're actually going to be attacking any areas adjacent to you because you and your opponent don't play the same way, and you don't even occupy the same spaces out on the map. One player is going to be moving through the mountains while the other moves through the forests, and this is only the start of the asymmetry in this game because you're playing almost a completely different game depending on which character that you're playing as. And it is somewhat interesting to me that I'm so excited about this game, but I don't really like games like Root where you have that wild asymmetry. But my main problem with games like Root is that every player has to play their character correctly so that you're not king-making some other player. Because a lot of times in those asymmetrical games, you have one character that's designed to keep another character in check, and then that character is designed to keep a different character in check. But if any one of those players play particularly poorly, or if they just end up putting their efforts somewhere else, then the character that they were supposed to keep in check can essentially run away with the game. That being said, the more that you play those games, especially with the same people, the more everyone gets accustomed with their role and they end up playing in a more balanced way. And I do think Root does have a few mechanisms in place, especially with their newer characters, in order to rectify that. So for that reason, I still do think it is a fantastic game. It's just not a game that I want to put all that investment into in order to get to that point. The reason this game doesn't have that problem is because there's only 2 characters. You have to keep your opponent in check and they have to keep you in check. So if you're not doing your job, it's only you to blame. So even if you're not a fan of games like Vast or Root, I wouldn't completely disregard this game, even though there are some obvious similarities between them, because I think this one just doesn't have those same issues. If anything, I'd say this game is more like Raptor, which is a game that I've had in my collection for years and I play it all the time. But Ironwood is more about the area control, and you don't see too many area control board games designed specifically for 2 players. And like I said before, in my experience, 2-player games are the ones that are the easiest to get to the table. And that's all I've really backed on Gamefound so far this year, but I do have a few special mentions of games that I'm either thinking about backing, that I would have backed if I didn't already own them, and also a couple that I was thinking I would back, but then decided not to in the end. And the first one we have here is for the new Terrorscape campaign, which is a campaign that I'm thinking about backing. And the reason that this one is so interesting to me is that it is a hidden movement game, which I don't really have in my collection, and also it looks like it's simple enough to jump into, has a horror theme, which is also something that I need to have more of, and it's quite the showpiece out on the table. In this game, one player is playing as a killer, while the other players are playing as different survivors stuck in a mansion, and players are going to be moving around making noise and revealing where they are or where they have been on the enemy's board anytime that they do something that happens to bring attention to them. But the reason that there's this giant house in the middle of the board is because the killer's going to be playing on one side of the board on their own map, and then all the other players are playing on the opposite side on their own map. This is definitely a game that I would not go all in on without first playing the game, and it also being a game that you absolutely love because the price on this one is just too expensive for what it is. Like I said, the game does look like a ton of fun, and I do think it does have some good design decisions in it as well, but I'd be lying to myself if I didn't say the novelty of this one is part of the reason that I'm even looking at it, because I do like the horror theme, and I think this is a great game to get out in October or near Halloween, but I don't know if I'm going to be playing it much more than that unless someone specifically asks for it. And also, I'm not super looking forward to putting together that giant mansion every time I play this game, which is another reason that I might not play it as much as I hope. I mean, it's not that many pieces, so maybe it's not as terrible to set up and tear down as I'm expecting, but if you do own this game or if you've played it, maybe you could leave a comment down below letting me know and letting anyone else know who might be interested in backing this one. I am really interested in this one, but unfortunately money's a factor as well, and this one's going to end up costing about $150 Canadian once you factor in shipping, just for the base game, so I wouldn't go any more than that, and even that I'm still on the fence about. So we'll see how it goes. I appreciate anyone who leaves a comment down below to convince me one way or the other. But now for a couple games that I would have probably backed if I didn't already have them, and the first one is for Mindbug Battlefruits. And this one is a bit of a special case because I recommend everyone have at least one copy of Mindbug. It's a fantastic game, super easy to play, and it's probably one of the best head-to-head card battlers that I've ever played, just because it's so clever with its design and it does a lot with just a deck of cards. You're also going to get a completely different game anytime you play this because you have a whole deck of cards to play from, but you're only going to be dealing 10 to each player, meaning that you could get any combination of cards anytime that you play this game. I have two different decks for Mindbug, and I love both of them, and I did want to go all in on this one, but the big issue with this one was, once again, the price. All these different versions of Mindbug are a lot of fun, and they all add their unique twists into the game, but in the end, they all do play on that same core mechanism, so if you just end up with one or two of these decks at some point in the future, I think that's more than enough to have in your collection, because even if you just buy one of these decks, you're paying 10% of the overall price, but getting pretty much 90% of the game. I think the only pledge that I'd consider on this campaign myself, if I didn't already own the game, is the starter menu, so that is the one that I would recommend if you do want to back this. It's going to be getting you two different decks as well as the components that go along with it. This isn't a deluxified version of the game, but I also don't really want a deluxified version of this game. Part of the charm here is just how small the game is, and I'd rather just take a deck of cards with me wherever I go and be able to play the core version of this game, rather than having to lug around all those deluxified components in that bigger box. I really do wish this was better priced because, like I said, the game is amazing and I do think everyone should have at least one of these decks in their collection, but it's just hard for me to recommend when you can go ahead and buy other games like Critters at War, which is another fantastic two-player game, for under $20 Canadian. And the next one that I would have backed if I didn't already own everything is the Castles of Burgundy campaign that launched earlier this year. This is a fantastic game. There's not much more I need to say about it. This is a game that I've played many times. It's definitely in my top 20 of all time. And it looks like it's that way for many people, seeing as it's the 16th overall on Boardgame Geek. But this is by far the best implementation of this game. And when I said I did back everything, I didn't actually get everything. I just got the things that I wanted, which is pretty much everything except for the miniatures. I don't recommend the miniatures for this game because it just makes the game longer and more fiddly. And because you're drawing tiles out of a bag, you're still going to have to use those tiles even if you have the miniature. The only difference is after you draw the tile, you then have to search through all the miniatures to find the appropriate one and then replace the tile with that miniature when it goes onto your board, which to me just adds a whole lot of headache that I don't really care for. Not to mention that it raises the price and probably the price of shipping, and you'll also have to have more space occupied on your shelf. That being said, I did grab the acrylic hexes and they're really nice and you don't have to paint them and they work both in the bag and on your board, so that is something that I do recommend. I do want to say that that's just my perspective and I have very little tolerance for fiddliness, so if the miniatures are worth it to you, totally respect that decision as long as you're not going into debt doing it. And I have a couple games that I was thinking about backing, but just decided not to in the end. And the first one is Grimcoven, and I'm pretty happy with my decision not backing this one. This is a cooperative boss battling game that has a lot of really interesting elements, but to me, it just didn't really have anything that really pulled me in or that really made me feel clever in the game. And if I were to add this into my collection, it would be competing with Cthulhu Death May Die in order to get out on the table. And I can guarantee you that Cthulhu Death May Die is going to win every single time because that is a game that gives you constant opportunities for clever decisions because there's so many things that you can do in that game that are actually bad for you, but if you time them just right, you can actually use them to your advantage. Cthulhu Death May Die is definitely in my top 10 games of all time, possibly in my top 5, so after I looked into this one, it was a pretty easy decision given what I already have. The other one that I was really interested in, but pretty much already certain that I wasn't going to back, was Odalin Dungeons of Doom. And this is the next campaign from Dragori Games that created games like Arena the Contest and Tenaris Adventures, but I already have both of those in my collection, so I don't think I need to add another one in the mix. If I didn't already have those, I might choose this one over either of those two, but I do already have those, so I'm going to stick with those. But if you do want to get a Dragori game, I would recommend just looking into all the different options that they have. If this is the one that speaks to you the most, feel free to grab it. But if either of those other two look more interesting to you, you could go ahead and grab those instead. But in the end, it is your decision, so I'm not going to fault anyone for doing whatever they want with their money. So if you do end up wanting to back this along with everything else, if you already own it, that's perfectly fine. But for me, there's just too much content to get through already, so I don't think I would end up ever getting this one to the table. But that's pretty much everything that interested me on Gamefound. Like I said, I did back a lot more over on Kickstarter, so if you do want to check that out, I will have a link to my separate video in the description down below. But overall, I think it's been a fantastic year for crowdfunded board games. I backed way more than I expected to, and there's been a lot more exciting and unique games than I was expecting to see. The one complaint I do have is just prices across the board have just skyrocketed, not only in board games, but with everything, which also makes it more difficult to spend money on board games. But I think companies are just getting a little too wise as to squeeze every penny out of their customers. I know some of it is that their costs have gone up as well, and a lot of people blame inflation, but prices are just going up way too fast for it to be only inflation. I try to never back things just on how it looks or on my initial impression. I always do try to understand the game and understand if it's a game that I will actually like and if the design backs up everything else that it's trying to deliver. It does take a lot more time to do that, so if you have more money than time, maybe just buying it is the option, but for me, I don't have much of either. But one thing that is for sure is I'm having a lot of fun. I'm always excited to get that next game to the table, and I hope you still have that passion as well. But that's it for this video. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.